Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
Alright people, review of the week time. But just a quick one. Before I have a look at the stories, talk about the fights on the weekend, yesterday I done some recording with Jamie from Punch Perfect Boxing. I've done that before with him and for part of his Between Round series, so he had me on as a guest again. He releases them in parts, so we done a lot of talking yesterday, so it's probably going to be a four-parter. First one's going to go up today. Should be probably up by the time this video goes up, so you'll see there on screen. He's got a great channel, just got over 1,000 subscribers, so if you could, anyone coming from here, go over, give it a look, give him a sub, help him out. He's a good kid, great channel, you know. I enjoy watching all his videos, does very good breakdowns, so me and him did a bit of chatting yesterday. Go over there, give it a look. Let's talk about boxing. Alright, so the main fight we got to talk about is Shakur Stevenson versus Jamel Herring. That's one of the fights that happened the weekend. There wasn't many fights happening this weekend. Of note, I can think of this one and another one, which I'll talk about in a sec. But I want to talk about the Herring-Stevens fight now. Now, basically, a lot of people I saw going into this fight were picking Jamel Herring to win. Now, Jamel Herring is a good fighter. He is. He's the best fighter that Shakur Stevenson has fought. But I felt like people were basing their pick on Herring based upon what he did in the Frampton fight. And whilst he did a great performance in the Carl Frampton fight, he did. Carl Frampton had seen better days. Seriously, Frampton had been on the decline since 2017. Realistically, after the Leo Santa Cruz rematch, it was quite apparent that Frampton was declining. He was regressing as a fighter. So for me, and I picked Jamel Herring to beat Carl Frampton, long before. For me, it was like, well, that's Frampton on the decline. Herring looked good against someone who was, further on in his career than he was. Against someone like Stevens, Shakur, he's not going to look as good. It's just as simple as. It's just a question of, will Shakur bring all the skills that we know he has? Because Shakur has very good speed, very good movement, very good punch selection. He was a very, very good amateur, showed a lot of skills in the amateurs. As a pro, whilst he's done what he's needed to do, he's undefeated, he's a two-weight world champion, he's looked good in parts, he's never really put everything he can do together, if that makes sense. We've never really seen him do that in the past, where all those skills he has, all those good traits he has, he's never really put them all together in one fight. Well, he did in this fight against Jamel Herring, and for me, it was a beatdown. It was just a consistent beatdown. And a lot of people were saying in the 10th round when the fight was stopped, it was premature. I personally don't feel it was. Having watched the fight, now I didn't watch it live, I watched it the next day. But having seen how easy Shakur was able to land his left hand, having seen just how easy he was able to just pick apart and break down Jamel Herring, I was like, no, that stoppage was perfect. Because Herring was getting hit very, very clean, very, very flush. He had a kind of high and wide guard, and it just wasn't stopping the shots coming through. He was just outmatched in terms of speed, youth, athleticism. Shakur had the better punch selection. So it was a consistent beating over the course of 10 rounds. So when the referee jumped in and stopped it, I didn't see an issue with that stoppage. Some people said, it was a bit premature. He was getting hit clean. I didn't see an issue with it. Now we're at 130. Shakur, he is WBO champion at that weight. So obviously the fight you're looking at, because it's an in-house fight, it's a unification, it would be Oscar Valdez, I should say. Oscar Rivas I'm going to talk about next. Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevens. Now, I like that fight. I really do. I think that it's very interesting. Oscar Valdez has, he's got a lot of controversy, I think, about him now. I think that's fair to say. Not just the fact that his last fight was controversial in terms of the scoring. I felt he lost it personally. But what was going on before that fight, we all know what I'm talking about there. In his fight against Conceição, and the fact that it was still allowed to go ahead, which I think, is just, that's the WBC for you. In terms of fights prior to that, against Burchelt, he looked amazing. He really did. He looked very good. And it does make you question kind of that now, knowing what happened with the subsequent failed drug test, I think he was tested positive for performance enhancer. So it does make you wonder, and it makes you wonder moving forward what's Oscar Valdez going to be like in terms against Shakur. I think that stylistically, I think Shakur wouldn't be very complimentary to Oscar Valdez. I think Oscar Valdez would struggle against Shakur. I think Shakur's youth, his accuracy, his punch selection. I think the fact that Valdez has been in so many wars, he's had so many tough fights. Like, I mean, go back and look at the Scott Quigg fight, and he won that fight reasonably comfortably. It was still a very, very tough fight. Took loads of shots. There was that fight, he was meant to fight someone who missed weight by 11 pounds. And he had another fight, like someone else who was on the card ended up stepping up and fighting him. Forget his name, was Adam something or Adam Lopez or something like that his name was. Anyway, that was a tough fight again. So he's been having a good few tough fights throughout his career, and I reckon now we're probably going to start to see him slow down a little bit. I think him against Shakur be a good fight. I'd favour Shakur in that fight. I'd favour him quite heavily. It's a question now is how long does Shakur have at 130 pounds, because he's, I believe, 23, 24. He's starting to kind of grow into his figure now a bit more, so you would imagine that even for him, because he started at 126, he was at 126 in 2019, now he's at 130. How long can he keep going at that weight? Could he enter the frame at 135 at some stage? And I think Shakur Stevenson at 135 would be a good shout. It'd be interesting to throw him into the mix with those guys. The guys like Tank Davis, Devin Haney, etc. Be interesting. So in terms of that performance against Herring, I was impressed. I kind of thought that everything that I know he has, he showed it. He showed he can go through the gears. He showed he can put everything into one fight, not just show bits of speed in this, bit of it. He showed it all in this fight. So I was very, very happy with that. If I have one criticism, I think that his punching power is a little bit, probably not amazing. I'm sure he hits hard enough to get your respect, but he's not a one-punch knockout artist by no stretch of the imagination. But that's neither here nor there. In terms of the other fight that happened on the weekend, there was a fight in Canada. Oscar Rivas fought for the WBC. Well, I say WBC. They're the only sanctioning body that has this title, the Bridgerweight world title. Doesn't that technically mean he's undisputed now? Undisputed Bridgerweight champion, because none of the other sanctioning bodies have it. I've given thoughts on Bridgerweight on live streams, but never really in a video. I don't think we need it. I think it's a bit silly. I think that the guy he fought, and it was a close fight, it was, but the guy he fought was 202 pounds on fight night. That's what he weighed in at. So I think the weight limit for Bridgerweight is like 225, 220 and around that. For him to weigh 202 pounds, that's quite a small cruiserweight, because most cruiserweights, when they come in the ring, they're weighing around 210, 215, maybe sometimes a little bit more. So you'd essentially Oscar Rivas, a fully fledged heavyweight. That's what he is. He was a heavyweight against a very small cruiserweight in a very competitive fight. It just doesn't. I just don't think we need it. I think the reason, like the WBC, are just, Sullivan is just, yeah. But I think that it's pretty obvious why they're doing it. It's obviously for money, obviously. And you only had to look at the rankings to know how kind of farcical it was. I mean, they were ranking guys who've never even fought at heavyweight, right? And were considered small cruiserweights. Like, I remember when they first released the rankings for Bridgerweight, they had Isaac Chamberlain. And Isaac Chamberlain's a good fighter, but one of the complaints people have about him is he's too small for cruiserweight, but too big for light heavyweight. But yet he's going in at Bridgerweight, which is technically the weight above cruiserweight. As, I think he was in their top 10. He was quite highly ranked. So who is really going to fight for a Bridgerweight world title? I just think it's silly. I don't think we need another weight division in boxing. I do think that the gap from light heavy to cruiser is a big gap, and I think that's where some people get stuck. And I'm not saying we need another weight division, but I do think, I don't know how you'd bridge that gap, but I do think that that's more of an issue, because the gap from, like I said, light heavy to cruiser is 25 pounds. So if you're struggling to make light heavy, but you're realistically only a 190 pound man, say that's what you're weighing, just fully, in shape, out of shape camp. If you're 190, you're still going to be a very, very small cruiserweight. So it is a bit of a tricky one, how you kind of bridge that gap. But I don't think Bridgerweight is the answer at all. I think that like Alexander Usyk has proved that you can go up to heavyweight and weigh about 215, 220 and be very effective. So I think Bridgerweight is it's, how do I word it? Like a solution that was never a solution to a problem that never existed. Maybe something like that. So that's my thoughts on that. They're the kind of main fights we had this weekend. In terms of like just boxing news, there's not much, it has to be said. I think the main kind of talking point was Dillian Whyte versus Otto Wallin. Meant to be having that fight this week. It's not happening now. Dillian Whyte citing a shoulder injury. And Team Otto Wallin are now saying they want proof. Because Otto Wallin has paid out, I think he said, a good few grand out of his own pocket, because training camps are expensive, for Dillian Whyte to just pull out. And as far as I'm aware, well, Eddie Hearn, I believe, said that he offered Otto Wallin, I think, Alan Babic, which, I'm like, really? Alan Babic, Otto Wallin? Like, Otto Wallin would beat the crap out of Alan Babic. He'd completely school him. But, I don't know. I mean, who's telling the truth there? Is it somewhere in the middle? Because you got Eric Molina in for Babic. You're going to really put him in. Now, Babic just strikes me as the kind of guy who'd fight anyone. Like, if you put him in with Otto Wallin, he probably would take it. But, yeah, it's an interesting one. Otto Wallin's team are saying, I think it was Dimitri Salida said they want to try and like go to seek legal action or something like that with the WBC, and it's like I don't think you can do that if it's just a voluntary. I think your kind of hands are tied there. But I was looking forward to that fight, I have to say. I was thinking it was going to be an interesting fight. I thought it was going to be a good scrap. It was competitive, and I was thinking, could Dillian Whyte come unstuck here? And I guess like I made a video talking about it, and I maintain, I wonder, was there some business minds, behind the scenes saying, do you know what? You've got this Fury fight pretty much guaranteed. You've got this mandatory shot pretty much guaranteed for next year. Do we need to fight a tricky, rangy southpaw with, good boxing ability? Yeah, he might not be the biggest puncher in the world, but definitely he strikes me as the kind of guy who could upset the apple cart. Do we need that? Or do you want to just hold out? Say, look, shoulder injury, because Dillian Whyte has had issues with shoulders in the past, famously against Anthony Joshua. And would it be easier to just say, look, wait till next year, you get that Fury fight, whether it's in the US or the UK, pretty much guaranteed. The WBC are expected to call it in sometime in November at their WBC conference, their annual conference, where they tend to announce a lot of, mandatory defences anyway. So you would imagine that's what's going to happen with Dillian Whyte, and they're probably just thinking, I reckon they have the demons of the Povetkin fight in their head. Not from the knockout necessarily, although possibly, but just how much that offset everything. Because they went into the Povetkin fight, and Dillian Whyte was so, like, that it just bred upset. Everything that was happening before that, as I said it just screamed upset. Because he was talking about everyone but his opponent. He's focusing on his title shot. He's focusing on next year. He went in against Povetkin. He got knocked out. He had to rematch him. We had to go through like a big rigmarole. He had to wait till March. Got the win. Got his mandatory status back. He doesn't want to have to risk losing that again, having to go down that road again, and then further push the mandatory back, because it will. And God knows what might happen in the immediate. AJ and Usyk might have their fight. AJ might win, Usyk might win, who knows. But then Fury might say, right, let's go undisputed. And it's made Dillian Whyte wait again. So I'm sure he's thinking, you know what? As much as I want to have a fight, as much as I'll fight anyone, I want my title shot. I'm sure Dillian Whyte feels he's long overdue that shot. And I'm sure he's thinking, you know what? The hell with this. I'm just going to take my shot against Fury. That's what I suspect has happened. But look, we'll wait and see. I could be wrong about that. Maybe it's legit. I don't know. In terms of some of the other news we have going, Dillian Whyte actually is in the news here. It says Joshua's problem is with himself, not with his coaches. So he's citing, from what I can see here in this article, he's citing the fact that he believes the problem Anthony Joshua is having, in terms of, people saying he needs to split from Rob McCracken if he wants to beat Alexander Usyk. Dylan Whyte is alluding to the fact that he believes the problem is with Anthony Joshua himself, and it doesn't matter what coach you put him in there with, he's always going to have problems with Alexander Usyk. And I agree with that. I think that, but look, I'll say AJ does need it, and he does need a change in the team. He does. I've said this for a long time. He needs to get rid of Rob McCracken, but I don't think it's as straightforward as that for Anthony Joshua in terms of him against Alexander Usyk. Personally, if in an ideal world, AJ, I would be advising him not to take the rematch, although he seems hell-bent on going through with it. Eddie Hearn has talked about March or April next year, more than likely in the UK. I would be saying, new trainer, let's have some fights against, let's step down a level, fight the kind of, I know he's already fought Takam, but kind of guys on that level again, and just learn with a new trainer, whether it would be Stacey McKinson, whether it would be Ronnie Shields, James Ali Bashir, guys like that, the guys who bring out the best. Because this is what I'm thinking, and this maybe some people could say you're overthinking things, but hear me out. AJ could leave Rob McCracken. Now Eddie Hearn is also saying on Boxing Scene here that AJ hasn't split from Rob McCracken, but let's just assume he's planning on it, okay? Because I'll touch on that now in a sec. But let's say he leaves Rob McCracken, signs with, let's just throw a name, James Ali Bashir. Decides to work with James Ali Bashir, okay? Now, I don't see AJ beating Usyk in the rematch. Let's say he goes in with the rematch with Usyk, with James Ali Bashir in his corner, and he loses, similar to how he lost the first time. Now, there's no rematch clause this time around. If AJ loses the rematch, he might look and say, well, you know what? I got a new trainer. I still lost. I should have just stayed loyal to Rob McCracken because that's what I knew. Especially if he loses worse second time around. Maybe he might look and think, you know what, it ain't broke, don't fix it. I should have just stuck with what I have. And therefore he might end up going back to where he was comfortable before. That might be overthinking things. We could say that is a bit overthinking, but you got to understand the way the psychology of certain fighters work. Maybe they think, well, I'll change it, and it didn't work. In fact, actually, when I changed it, it went a lot worse. So, God knows. Anthony Joshua has not split with Rob McCracken, says Eddie Hearn. Some people are surmising that AJ is in the US just trying to pick things up from these trainers as opposed to actually working with them. So maybe he's hoping by being in camp with Eddie Reynoso, Ronnie Shields, Virgil Hunter, etc., that maybe they'll be able to show him things that he can, use down the line. And one thing they always say about good fighters is good fighters take what they learn from previous trainers and carry it forward. For example, you look at Alexander Povetkin. The things he was taught when he was trained by Teddy Atlas, like the double left hook, the way he would kind of throw that, which is the way Teddy Atlas would teach it, he still kept that moving forward in his career. Like you look at the knockout he had against Johan Duhaupas, that was just scream Teddy Atlas. That knockout with the left hook, it was a double left hook actually. And that is what great fighters can do. Even though they're not working with that trainer anymore, they can still keep what they taught him. And I wonder if AJ is going to do something like that. Maybe he's not going to work with Ronnie Shields. Maybe he's not going to work with James Ali Bashir. But if they happen to teach him something, now it's going to be in a short space of time, I'm aware of that. But maybe he might be able to say, well, I'll take that and just put it in, my bag of tools moving forward. Potentially could be something that he's looking at doing. Potentially. What else do we have here? Anthony Joshua versus Alexander Usyk rematch slated for March of next year. That is going to be interesting. We'll need to see how that goes. I think that is a mistake for Anthony Joshua if he does take the rematch straight away, which he seems hell-bent on doing. As I said, I would be saying, I said this with the Ruiz fight. The Ruiz fight was altogether different. The Ruiz fight, I was like, well, he can win that because it's pretty straightforward how to beat Ruiz. You just keep him at range, don't engage with him. With Usyk, I don't have that same feeling. Like, when I went back on, I've watched that fight several times now. Every time I watch it, I'm just thinking, how do you beat this guy? Like, even if AJ goes and tries to put it on Alexander Usyk, to me, you're giving him more opportunities to stop you. And if AJ's stamina, which we can say is questionable still to this day, trying to put it on someone, alright, and not getting him out of there early, especially if AJ is going to pack on muscle, because some people are saying that's what he needs to do. If AJ goes in there with Usyk and tries to put it on him early, And Usyk is very skilled on the inside, very skilled at defending on the inside. If he can't get Usyk out of there after a couple of rounds, and he's really put a lot of energy in, he is going to be knackered. He is going to be absolutely knackered come the end of the fight, or come even the halfway point of the fight. So with AJ, every time I look, I'm just thinking, how do you actually beat Usyk? I don't know. I can't make heads or tails of it in my head how he can beat. I'm sure there's ways he can, and I probably just haven't really looked at it deeply enough. But it's going to be a hard ask for AJ. Triple G, Gennady Golovkin, has interest in facing Eubank Jr. in 2022. Interesting. Now, Triple G has his fight with Murata coming up in December, the end of December. So that's good. Now, that fight itself is interesting, Murata versus Triple G, because this isn't the Triple G of 2015, 2016. It's Triple G who, in my opinion, is starting to show signs of decline. He'll be out of the ring probably about a year, actually, at the time. So he'll be out of the ring a while. I think Triple G is there for the taking. I do. And that's why I think that someone like Eubank, because Triple G stylistically would be very good for Eubank Jr., because Triple G is going to come forward. It would give Eubank Jr. a chance to open up and let his combinations go. You know, when they were meant to fight before Eubank Jr., we'll say, lost his pen all those years ago, that was still a Triple G in his prime. Or if he wasn't in his prime, he wasn't far removed from it. Right now, in 2021, 2022, it's not the same Triple G. He's nearly 40. He's had a lot of tough fights. He's been at middleweight for over a decade. You know, that fight now is a lot more interesting, I can imagine. We'll need to see how Triple G looks against Murata. And that fight's going to be in Japan. It's an interesting fight. It's a very interesting fight. Devin Haney looks set to take on Jojo Diaz. Now, Jojo Diaz was meant to fight Ryan Garcia. Ryan Garcia says he injured his hand, so Eddie Hearn is looking to get that fight over the line for Devin Haney. I like that fight. You know, Devin Haney is an excellent boxer. He's an excellent boxer. People look at the Linares fight, and the Linares fight, there was a few kind of eyebrows raised, you know, especially in that 11th round. I think Devin Haney is someone who, he's a great boxer, but I do think he wants to try and show that he can bang a bit more than he can. I don't think Devin Haney is that type of fighter. I don't think he has that type of power. But against Jojo Diaz would be a good fight, I believe. I think Jojo Diaz versus him would be a good fight. The problem is there's a rematch clause in place for this. So I'm going to do a separate video talking about rematch clauses and why I'm sick of them for most fights. You know, for a voluntary, fine, but there's people doing them for mandatory. There's rematch clauses in like 10 rounders nowadays for certain fighters and certain promoters. So I'll do a separate video later on today talking about that, but that's pretty much it. I know Alexander Usyk was, you know, talking a little bit about Tyson Fury, and you know, he was saying that Tyson Fury sees himself as, you know, the king of the world, and Usyk doesn't. He sees himself as just the guy who goes into the gym, does his training and stuff like that. And I think Usyk gets the game from a psychological point of view. He gives nothing away. He really doesn't. And as Chris Andre said, how do you break Usyk down mentally? And I really don't think you can. He strikes me as someone who just mentally just seems really on top of everything his opponents would give to him. He really does. So him against Fury. If Fury gets through Dillian Whyte, if and when that fight happens, and if Usyk gets through AJ, which I personally expect him to do, a lot of people like Andre Ward and Carl Froch are saying Usyk's too small for Fury. I think Usyk would have a harder time against Fury than AJ, because Fury can switch things up a bit. But I think that Usyk's speed and his movement, I mean, look at Steve Cunningham. I know you can say that was all them years ago, but still, a short, fast heavyweight against Tyson Fury is interesting. I just think Usyk might be... Some people say he's too small. Is he too... If Fury makes it physical, like he did against Cunningham, maybe. But Usyk is better than Cunningham. So Usyk Fury is a fight I'm interested in. I think that's a great fight. I don't know who I'd be picking in that fight. Some people are saying it's a guaranteed Tyson Fury. Like Andre Ward, Usyk's too small. No. No, I think that fight's very competitive, and I'm not sure who I'd pick in that fight. I'd probably lean towards Fury, but I wouldn't rule out Usyk. In terms of the news, that's kind of really it. Like, there's not really much else been happening in the week that I know of anyway, so that's why it was kind of quiet week for videos. There wasn't much happening apart from like the Dillian Whyte pullout. With that card still going on, it's still not a great card. There hasn't been much else, so I'm gonna leave that there. Like I said, I'm gonna do a little video on rematch clause. Probably gonna upload that this evening because it's bank holiday here in Ireland, so there's not much happening. So watch the space for that. For now, lads and lassies, I hope you have a great Monday. You know, if you're working, keep doing it. If you're not, enjoy it. Hope you all have a great week. Hope you all get some good news or something like that happens this week. If you could, smash the like button. If you could. If you're new to the channel, if you're just dropping by and you like the content, subscribe, hit the old notification bell. For now, lads and lassies, I'll talk to you. Peace.